So when people talk about fusion, it's gotten a real bad rap lately, that it's basically just a lot of soloing over one chord. But you are truly a fusion player in the real meaning of the word, is that you meld together blues and bebop and rock and then New Orleans and all sorts of stuff. So
don't forget jazz.
Oh, jazz, of course. So the obvious question is how did you develop this kind of style?
Well, I never consciously brought in, different kind of musics to come together at all, but I guess really when I started playing, really becoming aware of jazz was the very, like 1969, 1970 I went to Berklee School, and I think I started really getting into jazz around 68, and there wasn't any fusion then, it was just like there was jazz and the whole thing, and then Miles started to play In a Silent Way and Bitches Brew, and now looking back, that's fusion. But at the time, I never, thought of being anything other than playing jazz music on the guitar. But I had started out playing blues. I really loved, Chicago blues and Muddy Waters and all that stuff. So then I spent a long time at Berklee with a big fat jazz guitar and copying, my idols, Jim Hall and Wes Montgomery and all those guys. And I was so in love with sort of jazz from the 60s that really didn't have guitar players in the groups, like Coltrane's group or Miles or, before Bitches Brew and all that when I started later on, started to play in bands that were playing the kind of expressive music that I wanted to play. I found that I went back to some of my rock or blues beginnings to use more of a distorted sound and bending notes and stuff like that. And so I guess that's a fusion of jazz guitar technique with what has become rock and roll guitar technique, which really started from the blues guys, from when B.B. King and those guys started to bend notes and play the blues like they sang it on the guitar. Yeah. There are a lot of guitar players that I really love, and people ask me who my influences are. And I end up, even though somebody, maybe you didn't copy them so much, you learn so much from just hearing somebody play really well. Like Jim Hall, even though actually I did copy him when I was younger. If people heard me, when people hear me on this tape, they're going to maybe say, God, it has nothing to do with Jim Hall to them. But you get so much just from learning about, from seeing anybody play the guitar really well in the jazz idiom, like Django Reinhardt or Charlie Christian or Wes Montgomery, any of those guys.
So how does someone that's really locked into position playing or shape playing, how would you suggest that they start developing that musical aspect?
As far as playing the guitar and trying to get away from down and up position playing, I guess what happened to me was that you learn out of necessity, because certain things don't fall in position, So the more you learn about playing the guitar, the more you go out of position, you go up and down instead of across a lot of times. Yeah. And this, for me, happened pretty naturally, I think. But I got to tell everybody, I can't remember what happened when I was 18, A lot of stuff I've forgotten, how I actually got to that point. But, you try and think of all the possibilities of ways to play something. But once you start learning a tune, I know learning Charlie Parker's Heads, trying to learn some of those pieces. You couldn't play them in one position, so you came up with this other way to play a musical phrase that was actually easier, and then you just use that in your improvising, And I was telling you this the other day, that when I first noticed that guys like George Benson would play primarily with 3 fingers and play a lot of sophisticated music, and seeing people play up and down the neck, there's a lot of better ways to get to some things than just playing across.
Yeah. You mentioned that there's nothing wrong with finding the easiest way to learn
well,
how to
it's
play.
actually the best way.
Yeah.
If you sit around and think of all the possible fingerings for everything you do, you're wasting a lot of time.
Yeah.
You know, I think making music right from the inception, even before, I mean, I don't think you're ever going to feel like you've mastered the guitar. But the easiest way is most times the best way, because you can get to it. And the whole thing about what I do is improvising. You know, it has to be easy, because what you're trying to do is play music, you know, and to have that come through you.
A problem that very many guitar players have is
Playing.
playing, right, is actually playing horizontally up the neck. And it's something that you do with great facility. And, you know, rock players are locked in their 5 boxes, and jazz players are locked in their positions or fingering positions, and yet you transcend that and you just play all over the neck.
Well, you know, it looks like that, Osgold, but you know, I'm locked into playing all over the neck. But no, nobody knows all the positions. Right. I mean, anybody can sit and figure out a million different ways to play something, but I think that's how you get to it, is by just thinking about it, thinking about how to get the best sound out of the guitar and the easiest way to play a phrase. Yeah. Well, you know, the piano's so linear like that. It's so much easier to play on a keyboard, because down is down and up is up. So, but I can do that a little bit on the guitar too. Even though it's hard to play just, you know, like this with one finger up and down, it does give you the feeling that you know you're going up when you go like that. But I mean, one thing is, if I just use the G string and the B string, but play kind of in the key of C diatonic or whatever progression. That might be a more natural way for me, anyway, to play that. But then you know, so learning little boxes moving around like that.
So you basically kind of went from C then to like an A7 to D minor, that kind of thing.
That sort of thing, and then an E flat diminished to E minor to F sharp diminished to G7 to G sharp diminished to A minor to B minor 7 flat 5 to C. I think that's that kind of progression, you know.
So that's how you would suggest the guitar players start working their way out of those boxes?
To just play and or to do it without the passing chords.
Right.
But just...
And that's just like running, the diatonic arpeggios.
Yeah. And then just, getting stuff around like that.
Could you do that one more time, a little slower?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Loud jazz is another kind of extravaganza. It's in 3, which makes it a little different and nice. But it's got this song form. And then I took the chords from the end of the song and moved them around chromatically to make this B section, which is a setup for Dennis to solo over. But it's... So it's related to the last 4 bars of the song form part of the thing.
So this is another tune that you set up Dennis to
yeah,
really
this
blaze
was another
over.
setup for Dennis to really
while you
blow
and
on.
Gary play this really neat figure. Could you tell me a little bit about this C over B chord in the 3rd bar of the A section? Yeah, that's a how would that?
Well, this whole thing is contrary motion. The E flat triad with A in the bass.
And contrary motion being...
And then the triad goes down, but the bass line goes up. The triad goes down a minor 3rd, and the bass note goes up a major 2nd. So it's... Yeah, just some movement.
It's a neat move.
Yeah, I like that.
Can I ask you to play that figure that you and Gary do over Dennis's solo just a little slower, if you don't mind?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Except for the last 3 chords. It's all either minor chords or this kind of like E with G sharp in the bass.
Yeah, and I also noticed that like, when you move, say like a passage, an ascending passage of chords, you'll pop hook the thumb over and do it.
Yeah, right, sure. Like,
right.
Well, on loud jazz.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe you could show that a little slower, and then so that's like an F sharp minor to. Oh, there's that E 7th over. Yeah.
Use it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's there.
That's very
you
cool.
Use that thumb. Yeah.
I'm really intrigued about that voicing that's found in so many of your songs in this era. That E flat with the G in the bass. Could you expound on that a little bit? Is that like a gospel kind of?
Well,
thing
yeah, I guess it is, but I guess it is kind of. It's really just a triad with a 3rd in the bass.
Yeah.
That's Amazing Grace,
right? Sure.
But that just has the tonic going to the 3rd.
Yeah.
So it's just something that comes up a lot. But you don't have to start on the tonic.
Right.
You just start on that.
That's what makes your stuff so hip, because you throw that right.
Yeah, I guess I've just about soaked that chord as much as I can, but it's certainly I didn't invent it. It's all over the place in pop music,
I guess the main concern is, say, a student or someone who's just learning to play jazz. What's that next step that person can take to break away from that kind of student mode and to really hone in on the improvisation.
Yeah, to really to be able to do something with it.
Yeah.
Well, I always, you know, I mean, I bet a lot of people out there have played, you know, some blues and felt like they were really playing and had some freedom with it and could be expressive, but then when they had to play on different material, they felt completely constricted.
Right.
And I think it's one thing is to try to, you know, understand the material you're playing and play it long enough, you know, like the chord progression you're going to try and improvise over or whatever, so that if you can actually get to the point where it's like it's as natural as a blues, you know.
Yeah.
Which means hearing it, means getting it in your ears, you know, getting these phrases so that you can hear them.
Got to develop the ear, right?
And yeah.
Yeah. How did you just by listening or by
Any way, shape, or form,
I
trying to hear intervals,
yeah.
trying to be able to recognize intervals, you know, and
That, you know, that's like a real neat thing about your playing is that you hear pitches in a scale that most players wouldn't really hear that readily. For example, you would hear the sharp 11th or you would hear the sharp 5, and you would integrate that into your style with great facility. And I was wondering if there are any ideas you might have that someone might, for someone else to integrate those kind of pitches into their playing.
Well, you know, the way I integrated certain pitches into my playing was from listening to music where, you know, it was pretty common, and not, you know, because when you get into, I was so influenced by Miles Davis and Coltrane and Bill Evans and these guys and records that they made in the 60s. I mean, so it really, I mean, I had a lot of records and still, you know, and so listening to this stuff all the time. So it might be less common to somebody who's kind of more into rock.
Right.
You know, they would think, oh, it's a far out interval. But if you really become a jazz fan and listening to bebop records all the time, and you know, the flatted fifth is really common. You know, as a matter of fact, Miles told me once, you know, got to stop playing that flatted fifth, man. That's an old cliche from 1949. So it's all relative.
Right.
But I think you can sit down and analytically look at intervals and just try and be able to recognize all of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because there's a finite amount.
And you just do that by practicing.
Yeah, you know,
thirds, fourths.
Yeah, well,
fifths,
also,
so
you know, you can have a friend say, you know, okay, what's that interval?
Yeah.
You know, or you know, and then move the root around. So I mean,
Fifth
move
and
the
flat seventh.
very good. Oscar, my God,
Man,
that's it.
lucky guess, John.
That's right. Pretty good. And you know,
Yeah,
things
so,
like
but
that.
stuff like that.
You know, and do that with your friends. We used to do that all the time.
Yeah, that's a great thing that you just trade intervals back and
Yeah,
forth until
yeah.
you'd be able to hear anything, right? Yeah,
And also you kind of you work on it, you get real good at it, and I haven't worked on it in so long. I probably am not as good as I was. You know.
But you can see how.
Don't test me. In other words, Oscar, don't please.
Test you. No, but say someone who hears this kind of chord. No, the C major 7 sharp 5.
That's
right?
what I was
That's
going
what you're
to say.
saying. But it doesn't sound very consonant when you first hear it.
Right.
Right.
It's harder than
Right.
C major 7, which we've learned to recognize that one.
Yeah.
Well, you sit there with a chord and play it enough, you'll get it in your ear.
Mm-hmm. When you play C major 7 sharp 5, for example, do you see it as a C major 7 sharp 5 or as a E triad over a C bass? Or do you see it as an A melodic minor 3rd degree kind of thing?
Well, I definitely don't see it as an A melodic minor. I mean, the whole idea of, I mean, maybe I realize that my hands are in the same place
Yeah.
when I'm going to play a scale that works over that as
Right.
A melodic minor. But I hear it as C major 7 sharp
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
I hear it as C with a raised fifth.
It's kind of neat.
And it just takes a long time before you do that. But that's a hard one. You know?
Yeah. So you basically hear major, minor, and dominant. You basically reduce it just to those three.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much, and that's just a major with an alteration. You know? Yeah, I'm always thinking major, minor, dominant, diminished.
Right.
But diminished could be kind of like dominant too, but most diminishes.
Yeah. I think we should mention that anyone who wants to learn more about the scales and the modes should check out your first video because you cover that in
Yeah,
depth.
and my first video, and also this has become common practice in jazz education or just music education to run these scales down. You know, I certainly didn't invent them.
Yeah.
You know, they were around a long time before I was. So there's a lot of places to get to knowledge about scales from.
Right. Do you have any devices that you rely on? For example, you're blowing and then you kind of maybe run out of stuff to play. Do you ever rely on anything to get you out of a jam? Or?
Well, I'm sure I do, and
I hear a butt coming.
well, I'm not going to tell you, you know, because then every time I played it, then those people would say, "Ah, there he goes. He's not really playing. He's going back." But they know anyway. Those people. But you know, the thing is, I try to not play those things. I don't have, you know, there's no, you know, the idea that you would have some stuff that would really work when you run out of ideas. That's not it. You know, you got the stuff that you fall back on is the most boring stuff. You know,
Right.
and for those and those things when you're falling back, even though everybody does it, those cliches and stuff. You know, when you think about it, I mean, it's almost like you're asking me, is there some good stuff to work when you're not really. You know,
Yeah.
do you have any good stuff that always works?
Right.
You know, it's not. It doesn't work like that. What really works is to try and improvise, and that's a painful thing. You know, that means you have to actually stop and sort of be befuddled for a minute. But I hear that in players that I really like, and I hear that kind of going for it. You know, to play an idea that doesn't work and then stop and go for something else. And you know, it's a constant. When you're improvising, it's a constant battle to not play cliches.
Another thing I want to talk about your style is the rhythmic aspect in your soloing. I think that's a really important thing we should talk about. How you phrase the rhythm is just as important as the notes that you choose. Yeah,
well, that's it. You said it right there. Some people think the rhythm's even more important, and in the kind of music that we're playing, you know, I mean, actually, maybe so. I mean, rhythm and notes, they almost are the same, they almost go hand in hand. I mean, the rhythm just means the spacing and the length of the note and where it falls in relation to the other notes and to the other music around you. There can be rhythm even when you're playing out of time, and there is always rhythm to what you play. But to check out, I mean, the rhythm of the phrases and where they fall on the beat is so important, and you can't play without it. So start the study of rhythm right
and
now.
How do you do that? How do you develop
just
that?
the same way. I mean, you know, just by you know, you're on the beat or off the beat, you know, on one or on the and of one, and different phrases. And
did you ever practice with the metronome on
yeah, I
2
used
and
to
4?
practice with the
that
metronome
deal?
on different places, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I stopped doing it so much because I found that sometimes I'd rely on it, and then when you went to play with the real drummers, they weren't playing the metronome. They were playing musical ideas too.
Yeah.
But you know, rhythm is melodic. Rhythm can be melodic, you know, and da 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 is kind of melodic, but it's a rhythm, you know.
Yeah.
And on this tape, the drummer I'm playing with, Dennis Chambers, plays such nice rhythms. You know, you can learn from listening to those rhythms.
Yeah, you mentioned that sometimes you can play a solo that's just one note, but if you choose a
hey, you know, if you put it in the right place and
yeah,
ba 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 ba, you know, and really nail it, that can be. I mean, you know, you can have all the licks and all that stuff in the world, but when you can't make it fit in with the rest of the music that's going on, which means when you can't place it rhythmically,
right,
you're in bad shape. You know.
That kind of like Neil Young on Cinnamon Girl, right? That classic one-note solo. You just
that one always killed me. I don't know what you're talking about, Oswald.